We are live.
All right. I think I heard you say that live. So welcome everybody. My name is Maggie Olin. I'm the chair of this committee. It's our Environment and Safety Committee for the City of Asheville. And this is our June 25th, 2024 remote meeting. All of the council committee members and staff are participating virtually. And to help folks follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda as we proceed through the conversation. We are streaming on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through our virtual engagement hub link. You can find that right on the front of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by calling 855-925-2801, and the meeting code is 9477. For those of you out there watching, welcome. And we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To do that, use that same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 947. When you do that, your phone will be muted. You'll hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. So let's get rolling. So as we proceed, let's start with some introductions to the committee and staff. If you wouldn't mind coming off mute after I say your name and say a quick hello. So starting off, our Vice Mayor, Sandra Kilgore.
Good morning.
And our Councilwoman, Shanika Smith.
Good morning.
Our City Manager, Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Our City Attorney, Brad Branham.
Good morning.
Our Police Chief, Mike Lamb.
Good morning.
And our Parks and Rec Director, D. Tyrell Muggert.
Good morning.
And are there any other folks visiting with us today from the staff side? We have everybody.
Good morning. This is
Oh, great. Our fire chief, welcome. And also some other fire staff, welcome. Okay. Let's go ahead and get started on our agenda. So to get us started, as is tradition with this committee, we do public comment at the front and at the end. So do we have any public comment to start our meeting today?
I am just reloading to double check. 1 moment.
Thank you.
No, I do not.
All right, then let's move on to the second agenda item, which is to approve the minutes from May 20th, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve?
Sandra, so moved. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Smith.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Motion passes. All right, so we are going to go into two discussion items that are really for information sharing today. The first item, agenda number 3, is about the solicitation ordinance. And I believe our police chief is going to lead us through that conversation.
Great. Thank you, Councilwoman Ullman. So just a quick information update for the changes in the solicitation ordinance, which took effect back in the fall. So we have been gathering data, looking at the calls for service, the decreases actually. And so we'll look at the data and then hit some main points on that. Next slide, please. Thank you, Katie. So key takeaways: the panhandling calls for service have increased over the past 10 years with a rapid decline in recent years, but that could be due to underreporting. There have been only 165 panhandling calls for service this year, which is approximately 40% less than the same time last year. Panhandling occurs most frequently in the commercial areas near high traffic corridors. So this is areas like Patton Avenue and also Tunnel Road, South Tunnel Road, and then our interstate exits. In some areas known for panhandling, there are a high number of pedestrian and motor vehicle collisions. And some recommendations that we're giving, and again, these are only recommendations, is that the high traffic zone designation based on traffic pattern and call for service, be it some additional areas to be considered, and that's Patton Avenue, Haywood Road, and then also South Tunnel Road. And it is recommended also that Zone 1, which is our downtown business district, be expanded to include sections of Merriman Avenue and South Slope, which are currently not within that designated high traffic zone. And lastly, there's what's really helped with the technical changes in this ordinance has been that it's clarified a lot of the language for officers who are charged with enforcing this ordinance. So that's been very helpful. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot and look at the last 10 years of panhandling calls for service. You can see that it really peaked there in 2017 and kind of plateaued 2018, 2019, and then 2020. And then in 2021, there was a great decrease. And this also coincides with whenever we did the changes in our reporting protocols. So calls for service that we would go on, and that was due to staffing challenges. And then you can see it's plateaued that 2021, 2022, 2023. But so far in 2024, we've had, like I said, the key takeaways, only 165 panhandling calls for service, which again is a 40% reduction compared to our panhandling calls that were this time last year. Next slide, please. So looking at our 2023 panhandling locations, you've got really Patton Avenue, Merriman Avenue, close to 240, Haywood Road, and then also Smoky Park Highway. And within these areas, with Merriman Avenue, there were 10 panhandling calls for service and also 3 pedestrian motor vehicle accidents. The Haywood Road area, which is kind of that I-240 exit 2 area, there were 40 panhandling calls with 3 pedestrian motor vehicle accidents. Patton Avenue in West Asheville, that stretch there on the left, you can see it's 103 panhandling calls for service and then 2 pedestrian motor vehicle accidents. And then along Smoky Park Highway, far left near exit 44, there at Interstate 40, we've had 38 panhandling calls for service and 1 pedestrian motor vehicle accident. Next slide, please. So here's a density map of 2023 in our pedestrian panhandling and pedestrian crash locations. So you can see with those collisions, pedestrian collisions, that 1 out west, 2 Patton Avenue, 3 in that Haywood Road corridor near Interstate 240, near the Burton Street area, and then 3 at Merriman at 240, and then a couple there on Tunnel Road. Next slide, please. So looking at the changes in the language within public solicitation being regulated. So just to recap, it prohibits acts of solicitation based under certain conditions, such as panhandling folks that are being physically or verbally aggressive and exhibiting that aggressive behavior. Sometimes it depends on the time of day, like at night, and also folks that are under the panhandling under the influence of alcohol or a controlled substance. So in addition to the restrictions set forward in Section B1, it's unlawful for any person to verbally beg, solicit, or panhandle within the high traffic zones. Now, one important distinction is that it specifies that it's verbal. So solicitation with a printed sign is still is prohibited. So, is permitted. So folks are still allowed to hold a sign and panhandle, just not verbally panhandle within those high traffic zones. So there's currently only 2 areas that are designated as high traffic zones, and that's portions of the Central Business District, but it's specified by street, and then also Biltmore Village Historic District. Next slide, please. So this is a map of the high traffic zone downtown, Zone 1, and you can see in the bold outline that it encompasses mainly the center of downtown to include Haywood Street, Patton Avenue, an upper portion of Ashland Avenue, Cox Avenue, and then Biltmore around Peck Square down to Interstate 240 along Haywood Street, and then around Peck Square and Roger McGuire Park. When looking at the panhandling calls for service within this area, there were 24 panhandling calls for service and 8 pedestrian motor vehicle accidents in 2023. Next slide, please. Now, transitioning to the other high traffic zone, which is Biltmore Village, looking at 2023, there were only 3 panhandling calls for service and 0 pedestrian collisions in the Biltmore Village area. Next slide, please. So looking at 10 years of panhandling calls for service, we have over 11,000 calls since 2013. Number of calls range from, or the number of calls of service from 2021 to 23 dropped, and reductions began during the 2020 pandemic, but dropped sharply in mid-2021, which corresponds with the changes in our response protocols. So over the past 5 years, the highest volume of calls for service include North and South Tunnel Road, Patton Avenue, Bavard Road, Exit 44, Merriman Avenue, and also Haywood Road. Next slide. So the relationship between panhandling and pedestrian crashes, we have 1 out of every 5 pedestrian crashes occur within 25 feet of a reported panhandling location. 3 out of every 4 crashes happen within 500 feet of a panhandling location. And downtown is the highest concentrations of pedestrian crashes in the city, which the slide had, it was 8 crashes, but only accounts for 15% of all pedestrian crashes. Several areas have both panhandling and pedestrian crashes, such as Patton Avenue, Haywood Road, Merriman Avenue, North and South Tunnel Road, and then Exit 44. And there are areas with pedestrian crashes with little or no reports of panhandling, such as Biltmore Village, VA Hospital area, Hendersonville Road near Mills Gap. Next slide, please. So again, the key takeaways: panhandling calls for service have increased over the past 10 years, with a rapid decline in recent years, likely due to underreporting. There have been only 165 panhandling calls for service so far this year, which is 40% less than this time last year. Panhandling occurs more frequently in commercial areas like South Tunnel Road, Patton Avenue, and the interstate exits. In some areas known for panhandling, there's a high number of pedestrian motor vehicle collisions. It's recommended that additional areas be considered for those high traffic zones. Again, that's Patton Avenue, Haywood Road, South Tunnel Road, and then that Zone 1 be expanded to include Merriman Avenue, that just north of Interstate 240, and then the South Slope. And then again, it's the technical amendments to the ordinance have helped clarify the rules for officers that are charged with enforcing that ordinance. And next slide, please. Thank you, Katie. Any questions?
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate the update. It's interesting to see the data. Questions from the team? I have some thoughts, but going back to my slides. Can you talk to me more about some of the data is really talking about the correlation between pedestrian crashes and where there's been solicitation calls. And I think a lot about transportation safety. And so I know that when we're talking about pedestrian accidents, there's so many factors involved, from the design to the traffic volume to the speed. So I'm most often thinking about pedestrian safety from a lens of transportation and transportation design. Can you talk to me any more about this data? I feel like what you're showing is that we're seeing people who are panhandling getting in vehicle collisions, or I guess what I'm trying to connect the dots here is that what you're telling me, that we're seeing pedestrians who are panhandling getting into vehicle crashes, or you're just correlating that there's more unsafety in the area because people are in the roadway? Can you just talk to me about that data point and why that's useful to you when you're kind of tracking the progress of this?
Yeah, so there are crashes that are occurring with folks that are panhandling getting involved in crashes. Sometimes there's a level of impairment there on the part of the pedestrian. At nighttime, there's factors where someone is wearing dark clothing and it's not exactly a well-lit area. And so that's not the main reason though, but there are folks that are engaged in panhandling that are getting involved in motor vehicle collisions, especially at those heavy intersections or heavily trafficked intersections. So you've got like Brevard Road there at Interstate 240, exit 44. There's been a few crashes involving pedestrians that were panhandling. And then there's also some other behavior that we're seeing, especially at the on-ramps and off-ramps, is just vehicle collisions that are related to the panhandling. So for an example, a green light would show, and then a driver would see the green light, traffic would start to go, and then a driver will stop to give money and then get hit from behind by another vehicle that was assuming that traffic was going to keep on going at the green light. So we're seeing some of that also. But, I don't have the percentages or the numbers as far as, and sometimes it's hard to separate and really know, like, was that pedestrian specifically involved in panhandling at the time? Some folks have had a history of being charged with panhandling that have been involved in these collisions. But, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there's so many different factors that come into play with these collisions. So I think that's a small part of it, but there's, like you said, there's so many other factors involved as well.
Thanks. I appreciate you elaborating on that, because I would imagine too that just looking at crashes, not even pedestrian crashes, would be part of this picture too, if we're having multiple uses in a space that isn't really designed for pedestrians to be in the space. So just it was helpful to understand kind of why this was a key data point that you were interested in looking at.
And Madam Chair, if I could, when we first started looking at this, I think last year there were a couple more actual individuals involved in panhandling that were struck by a vehicle. And I think our point is that panhandling is not safe if it is done in areas where there is a lot of vehicular traffic. And I mean, because the clarity of the ordinance was to ensure if there were going to be panhandling, that it was done in a safe manner and in an area that was safe. And what we were finding is that, unfortunately, panhandling was done in the streets, in the medians, and in that public right-of-way where it made it very, very not only unsafe for the motorists, but definitely unsafe for the panhandler who was in that space. And Chief, if I misrepresented that, please correct me.
Yes, no, you're 100% correct.
I have one or so more questions. When we're looking at the locations maps, it really seems like you could make a statement that the majority of our panhandling is happening where there's intersections of highway and city and people living. And so, I mean, you can understand that there's cars queuing, there's a constant flow, so it's kind of that's the reason. But there are some places like Haywood Road where it's more in a specific business corridor. So I was pleased to see that we're seeing very little calls for service in Biltmore Village, which is an important business community. And downtown, it seems like we're seeing less. But could you talk to me about Haywood Road? Because that's not one of those overlaps where people are getting in and out of the highway because it's spilling further into the commercial corridor. Could you just talk to me a little bit more about the zoom in of the Haywood Road engagement you're seeing?
Yeah, so there's the pedestrian traffic all along Haywood Road. And, of course, over the last several years, Haywood Road has really increased in popularity, especially with businesses. So more people are frequenting that area. So there's when someone is panhandling, especially aggressively to other pedestrians, we'll have increased calls for service. The couple of intersections that folks panhandle from, and then try to get that money from vehicular traffic or from drivers. I think our biggest area is right there at the off ramp from Haywood Road or from 240 west going on to Haywood Road, close to Burton Street in that area. So that is a place where we frequently get complaints, but then also occasionally some folks will set up at intersections and then also panhandle at those red lights as well.
Thanks. I had one more thing. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but you all know when to jump in if you care to. I guess the thing I just wanted to say is I feel like it's really important for us to always take our public safety conversations in the context of all the other things that we're doing, because we're doing both and solutions around issues like panhandling. Today, we're going to have a work session to look at our updated affordable housing plan, which to me, if someone is panhandling, from having talked to people who've had that lived experience, it's often one of the worst days of their life, right? People aren't doing this for fun. There's a lot of people out there having a hard time. And so as we look at providing more housing for folks to be in a safe place, as we look at having conversations about the Ramada Inn and permanent supportive housing services, there's so much we're doing in our housing strategies and our affordability strategies that I think complement us still upholding the rules of our city and us still upholding the laws of our city, like our solicitation ordinance. So I just wanted to contribute that, because I think sometimes holding all those pieces at the same time, we can forget.
Yeah, and it's
Oh yeah, Vice Mayor.
Go ahead, Chief. No, and the one thing I was just wondering, I know that you've compiled so much information and sort of thought about what Maggie was saying. I was just wondering, do you all basically have any idea as to the reasoning behind the panhandlers? Like you said, different people panhandling for different reasons. I was just wondering, was there ever data collected as to sort of give us an idea as to who is panhandling and what the reasoning behind it? Because is it people that really need to take data? Are they struggling, or is it really people that are panhandling for other substance abuse needs, or things like that? Do you ever keep any kind of data like that? That's just
Yeah, so as far as collecting data, no, but I had the blessing of being part of a community engagement division for a couple of years, and so we interacted with a lot of folks that were panhandling at intersections, and there were a variety of stories there, from folks that were panhandling to get a hotel room for that night, to folks that were panhandling for food. One recurring theme that we saw was a lot of addiction was driving a lot of that behavior. So, that's why it's we've done a great job, especially on the city website, of saying, like, if you really want to help someone, if you truly want to give, there's a lot of different options out there, from outreach groups to other organizations that are providing work to offer, low-income permanent or supportive housing, and then also doing day shelter work, to churches that are doing a room like welcome tables where they're offering food. So there's I think our community is really blessed with a lot of different services that they're offering to folks that are in need. And so oftentimes, instead of giving money which may be going to some type of addictive behavior and not really helping the person, it's important that we take the option of giving to those organizations that are really doing the work out there to help people that are struggling in our community.
And basically, so you're saying that a lot of times when you do encounter people that have the need for food or hotel or shelter, do you actually reach out to those organizations and sort of coordinate help for that person, or do you just leave them doing what they're doing?
No, we try to connect them with the services. One example is we did a couple of different panhandling operations, and if I remember correctly, it was 2022, where prior to doing enforcement action, we had outreach workers go out ahead of us and say, hey, just want to let you know the city is going out and they will be doing panhandling enforcement. We want to offer you these services ahead of time so that you have like a better link with different services instead of, putting your life in danger by standing at an intersection.
Great. Okay. Thank you so very much.
All right. Thanks for coming with this update. Unless there's any other comments or thoughts, I think we will say thank you and move on to our next agenda item.
All right, thank you very much.
Here. Okay. Shifting to our fourth agenda item is the Asheville Parks and Recreation 10-year plan update. We've been getting updates throughout the year as you've been doing this planning process. I'm very excited to hear where we are in the process right now and where we're going, really. So I'll pass it over to D. Tyrell.
Thank you, Council Committee Chair Ullman, Vice Mayor Kilgore, Councilor Smith. I'm D. Tyrell McGirt, Parks and Recreation Director here with the City of Asheville. And yeah, today I'm providing an overview, high-level overview of where things stand with the current 10-year Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Plan. Before I get started or dig any deep, I do want to acknowledge Pete Wall, the Assistant Parks and Recreation Director, along with Al Koff, our landscape architect here within Asheville Parks and Rec, have been the key staff doing the heavy lifting and working collaboratively with the consultants on this plan for the last several months. So all of their hard work, along with the efforts of the consultants, have gotten us to this place. As you said, Chair, you've been getting some updates. This has been a long process and we're finally at the end. So the goal now is to kind of get over the finishing line. We have been working the last year with Design and Workshop, which is a landscape architectural firm based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I do want to acknowledge that we have Brenna Laffey here. Brenna has been the project lead on this project, and I want to take a few minutes to give Brenna a few moments to introduce herself and say any opening remarks.
Thanks, Steve. Brenna Laffey with Design Workshop in our Raleigh studio, and it's been a wonderful process to get to know Asheville Parks and Recreation System, get to know the community, and we're really excited to share this draft plan and hope that it will be a working document that really sets you all up for success 10 years and beyond. So really looking forward to hearing your comments and questions, and thank you so much for your time again.
Thanks, Brenna. Before I get started, just want to point out that it was important to us that we end up with a plan that doesn't just sit on the shelf for the next 10 years, that we have a plan that is more practical than visionary in scope. So as we go through the high-level overview and understanding what the plan includes, I hope you are able to see that the recommendations that are coming out of the plan are things that are reasonable, realistically, that we're able to accomplish over the next 10 years. Next slide. Some key takeaways. The plan is a lot. Our system is big, but some big overarching things are, as we heard from citizens during the public engagement piece, we heard from 5 key focus areas of the plan that focus on strategic investments, that we will be focusing our concentration in developing a strategic action plan around those 5 key areas. Investment zones identified based on geographic areas of the most need in our community. And the factors that go into indicating what need is include equity, the conditions of the park, the size of the park, the number of people it serves, and the type of park experiences individuals are able to have in those park spaces. It's important to point out that equity based on the social determinants of health is a major weighted factor we use when determining what investment zone areas will look like as we move forward. Lastly, the plan does identify short-term, mid-term, long-term goals based on programs and projects that we want to knock out in the next 10 years. So programming, maintenance, how do we maintain our current infrastructure, What does upgrades to our current centers look like? Redevelopment of center areas, new parks. Where do we put them? What do we include in those parks? And special amenities are the recommendations that are coming out of the plan. Next slide. So, Recreate Asheville, Shaping Our City Parks. This is the title that we've given to the comprehensive 10-year plan. And this is the plan that would be used, that we will use as our roadmap to help us understand what we need to, how we connect, what we fix, how we build, and how we preserve our recreation system here in Asheville. Next slide. So this has been a long process. We started coming before you all last summer, giving you an update on kind of the overview of the plan and what we were planning to do. Phase 1 included the community needs assessment, which included a number of stakeholder meetings, community focus groups, surveys that we put out. We were able to get all of that feedback in the fall, and that helped us put together the rough draft of the plan, which we were able to go back out to the community and just solicit, hey, are we on the right track? Is what you communicated to us in the fall and doing the public engagement piece lining up with what you see outlined in this initial draft format? Once we got all of that feedback, Design Workshop went back to the table and have created the final draft, which is what we're presenting now. So we're in phase 3 of the plan. And again, I'll talk a little more later about what phase 3 will include and how we get this plan over the hurdle. Next slide. So just diving into the plan a little bit, it was important to us that the people that we heard back from actually represent the demographics here in Asheville. If you see in this graph here, you see per U.S. Census data, Asheville's demographic population is identified. And then on the other side of the graph identifies who we heard from in a statistically valid survey. So under Black African-American population, you see per U.S. Census data, the population here in Asheville is 10.4%. We heard back from those who completed the survey, 10.6%. Hispanic Latino population, those who identify as Hispanic or Latino, the population demographic here in Asheville is 6.2. From those we heard back from, equals 7%. And individuals who identify as having someone with a disability in their household, Asheville's demographic is 12.7. We heard back from 14% of those constituents. You can see the age group breakdown there. So it kind of matches up. The people we actually heard back from matches the demographic data for the city of Asheville. So that tells us that we're capturing good feedback from a cross-representation of what Asheville actually looks like. Next slide. And I'm sorry, as I go along, if there are questions about any of this, please feel free to just chime in.
I'll jump in just with a kudos. That's fantastic. I mean, we do it as an organization a tremendous amount of community engagement. It's part of government, right? We serve the people, and I can't remember a time that we've had such representative info. And then as an aside, I love that there was 5.5% response from kids under 5. I would love to hear what their input was. I bet it was really cute. But anyway, thanks.
Thanks, Chair Ullman. Getting into the needs assessment input, again, the public engagement session included a lot. I talked about the statistically valid survey that was mailed out to specific individuals. There was also a public open survey that any citizen in Asheville could go to the Recreate Asheville website, complete and provide their feedback that way. And there was a huge initiative on our end to get that word out about how you go and complete that. We also went to a number of public engagement workshops and events. We had pop-up events throughout town. We went into every housing area in town. And we also had these pop-up events at community centers, in parks, where we encouraged the public to come out and provide their feedback. Equity is a huge part of this, so it was important that the individuals from underserved communities that we heard from them and that their needs and what they said in the survey and feedback kind of rose to the top. Equally as important is peer benchmarking, making sure that we're comparing ourselves to other municipalities that are already doing some great things, as evident by being an accredited Parks and Rec department and winning gold medal awards with the National Recreation and Park Association. We not only want to compare ourselves to other similar sized cities, but we want to make sure that those who we are comparing ourselves to are doing some good work already. And lastly, understanding what the trends are in Parks and Rec and ensuring that as we make decisions on projects and programs and investments, that we're keeping up with the current trends in the industry. So all of that was taken into account. We got feedback from citizens on all of this information, and it came up with our highest priority needs. And those are the two charts that you see here. Those projects and programs are ranked in levels of highest priority, medium priority, and then low priority. So based on all of the feedback that we collected, this is how we kind of prioritize what those project investments will look like moving forward. Next slide. So our vision, Asheville's Parks and Recreation envisions a community where every member has equitable access to a high quality and connected system of parks and recreation centers, providing vital gathering spaces and programs that improve health and safety, environmental resiliency, while promoting local character, vibrancy, and a sense of place. So this is the overarching vision. Again, as a Parks and Rec department, we're trying to do a lot. So this is the vision that the plan has, that has been outlined in the plan. The emphasis is here is every member has equitable access to our park system. Next slide. So again, I mentioned in the fall, we went through the public engagement process where we got a better understanding of what the needs are within Asheville's Parks and Rec system. From that process, we came up with these, based on the feedback that we heard, all of that information was synthesized and we came up with these 5 themes. Stewards and maintain parks for all. We heard from community members that the care, the operation, and investments in our recreation spaces is important to them, that it's equitable, and that when you're in these recreation spaces, that they have quality experiences. Access and connectivity. It's important to our citizens that our parks and centers are easy to get to. And then once they get there, that they feel welcomed and safe in those spaces, and that there are no barriers to them participating in any of the programs that we are offering. Community health and wellness. It's important to our citizens that our centers are seen as essential infrastructure where they can go to for health and wellness opportunities to get some equitable outcomes. Gathering and placemaking. This talks to providing gathering spaces within our park system that help celebrate the arts, the unique culture here in Asheville, and our unique place here in this region, the Blue Ridge Mountains. And lastly, resilient natural environments. It's important to our citizens that our built infrastructures, our built playgrounds and centers kind of integrate well with the natural resources that we have around us. Next slide. So we have those big 5 themes, and under those themes, this identifies our strategic action plan. So the big piece that we're getting out of this comprehensive plan, Recreate Asheville, is a strategic action plan to ensure that we are accomplishing the recommendations that are coming out of this. So each of the 5 themes have goals and objectives, and each of those goals and objectives have a timeline so that we complete it over the next 10 years, and it identifies a staff person who's going to be responsible for ensuring that those goals and objectives get accomplished. So for instance, we look under access and connectivity. The first goal there is create a safe route to parks program, increasing the ease of access to the park system. That's goal number one. Under that goal are several different objectives. Under each objective, there's a timeline for us to complete that objective over the next 10 years. And again, a staff person who's been identified to ensure that we accomplish that goal. So for each of these, this is the process. This is the meat of the comprehensive plan that allows us to work from the vision and again, ensure that we're getting the recommendations actually accomplished. Brenna, did you have anything to add to this piece?
I think that was a great explanation. Yeah, just in the draft plan, you'll see charts, what we call the action plan for each of these themes. As Dee mentioned, that has the key objectives or specific actions to accomplish each of these key goals, and indicates all of that information. So you can see more detail in the plan for each of these themes that breaks it down.
Next slide. Thanks, Brenna. I talked about equity and understanding equity investment zones based on the 5 social determinants of health, which we've identified here as education, access, and quality, economic stability, social and community context, neighborhood and built environments, and healthcare access and quality. So based on those social determinants of health, help indicate where we have identified equity investment zones across Asheville. So this map illustrates where you see the darker shades of blue. Those are the areas that are identified as the high priority investment areas in the system, and so forth and so on by the shades of blue. The low priority investment areas are identified by the white shaded areas in this mapping. So this helps us identify where some of the priority areas of Asheville, we want to focus a lot of our attention and investments. Next slide. So creating the vision plan, again, ensuring that at the end of 10 years, we have something to show. We can look back to this plan and say, yes, we've accomplished these things. Now, Recreate Asheville has identified the projects based on the feedback that we heard from the public. We know the types of projects and the types of programs that the community has said they want to see. Now we ask ourselves a series of questions to help us understand what projects, programs get priority. I just talked about the equity zones. Does it serve vulnerable residents? That's one of the questions that's asked to help us understand where we invest in areas and what projects and programs do we rise to the top. Can it meet climate justice goals? What condition is the park in? This is another big one. We know we have aging infrastructure in our system, so asking ourselves what condition the park is in helps us understand what becomes a priority. The next 4 questions: what size is it? Does it have a range of amenity types? How many residents does it serve? And what type of facility or park is it? Also helps us identify where the need is and what rises to the top of the priority list. Lastly, does it have support? And when we're asking the question, does it have support, we're ensuring that we're asking ourselves, does this have the backing of constituent groups or residents that we've heard from, or are there other public projects that align with this community priority? So keeping in mind other things that may be happening around the city, does a project in this area align with that so that we get the most bang for our buck here? This helps us understand the priority investment areas. Brenna, anything additional here?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I think just adding that each project was scored in each of these categories, and then we used that as the overall organizing factor for the phasing that Dee will walk through in a minute.
Thanks, Brenna. Next slide. So this is it, y'all. This is the meat of it. This is the part that I've been waiting to get over the last several months. The vision plan projects. What are the areas that we're going to focus in? what all needs to happen within the system, and then next, what do we phase and trying to get done. So after we go through all that, we understand that 36 major existing park have been identified for upgrades and redevelopment. 8 centers have been identified for major redevelopment projects. That's pretty much all of our centers. 8 new neighborhood parks have been identified. Again, we want to keep up with what's happening, what's new, the trends in recreation. One of the trends is making sure that there's a park within a 10-minute walk of where residents live. And we currently don't have that around the system. So identifying areas in Asheville where new park development could happen. And 9 new major special use facilities. And special use facilities may be aquatic facilities, racket court facilities, walking loops within parks, bike trails, etc. So those are some special use park facilities, and of course, deferred maintenance across the system. This is all the things that have been identified that need to happen to get us kind of up to speed. And then those projects have been phased out into 4 different phases that are mapped out here. We'll walk through the next slide to help understand a little bit better what the first priorities are. Next slide. So phase 1, short term, that's 1 to 4 years. We're looking at 6 major park upgrades or redevelopment areas. And you can see on the map, these are the parks that have been identified. Burton Street Park, and we're talking about the space around the Burton Street Community Center, updating, outfitting, making some improvements in that park space. Malvern Hills Park, we know there's some opportunities for some improvements to infrastructure there. Murray Hill, Walton Street, continuing to make some additional investments in that park. And then we have this property down in South Asheville, Sweeten Creek Park, that we bought with the purchase with the last bond initiative that will have risen to the top on a plan to do some development opportunities there. Recreation Park is also on here. It's one of those parks that is large in scope. It has a number of different amenities. It has been identified as a place where we can make some additional investments. 2 centers, Shiloh is one of the centers that's been identified as making improvements to, along with Tempe, Avery, Montford. 1 new neighborhood park, that's the Sweeten Creek Park that I just spoke to, and 2 new major special use facilities. Pickleball and the aquatic facility over at Malvern Hills Park have been identified there. So I stop here. Brenna, anything to add here? And are there any questions from council?
Yeah, I would just add, I think what's exciting about this first phase, Dee alluded to everybody within a 10-minute walk, and that's a big goal in Asheville. There's lots of barriers that contribute to that. And so this first phase really focuses on improving the quality of the parks that are already there. So when we take a look at how many residents are within a 10-minute walk currently, we also look at how many residents are within a high quality park currently. And so this first phase actually bridges that gap. So in the first 4 years, you're bringing these parks up to quality. Now you've got the same percentage of people who have walking distance to a park and distance to a quality park experience. And so I think that's really exciting in terms of how the prioritization criteria worked out and really reduces that outcome. So I wanted to just share that bit of information.
Thanks, Brenna. Chair Ullman.
Along that line, first, I really like the prioritization approach. It's just nice to understand, given council weighs in and makes decisions at a much bigger picture. And by the time you're bringing budgets to us, there's been a lot of work done. So really seeing this is the strategy you're going to use is very helpful as we play our part of the team. The part we were just discussing on the 1 to 4 years, you can tell when you're looking at this slide that there's a lot of these green flags of existing facilities and these priorities that are kind of concentrated in certain areas, whereas you look in South Asheville and there's very little park facilities. Am I connecting the right dot that a lot of this has to do with population density if we're trying to get to resident spread. So we're seeing in our highest population density towards the center, and so we want to be serving the most residents, et cetera. And so that's some of the assumption and strategy there is about that access. Okay.
Brent,
When you kind of overlap all of those factors, including population density as part of it. Yes.
and Katie, can you go back one slide? Another slide, sorry. Chair Oman, we also, all of these questions, the matrix that were put together to kind of prioritize those projects, understanding the equity zones, and the matrix for each of these questions also help inform where the first phase of recommendations will happen.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the map of the equity zones and you're considering how many residents it serves and all these other things, I think that's helpful. I think that's a really awesome lens to apply to. I think that we've seen approaches at different times in the life of the city that we're saying, well, let's do even geography, east, west, north, south, central. And it would be, let's rotate, or squeaky wheels get the grease, and there isn't even a geographic preference. But this is not about equality. This is about equity. This is really about kind of landing it there, which I think is great. And I think is a good lens in understanding, investing out from there kind of radius.
Thanks, Katie. You can move forward. We took the same approach with phase 2. Again, it's important that we are identifying projects in a realistic timeline that are practical to get done. This is the midterm phasing portion of it. I won't go through this like I did phase 1, but it just identifies the next set of parks, centers, special amenity projects that will be identified in phase 2. This is the next list of priorities. Next slide. And we do the same thing for phase 3, which gets us out to around that 10-year mark plus. So again, we identified everything in the system that needs to happen, and then we've broken it out into 4 phases to try to get those things done in a realistic timeline that's feasible for us to do and realistic. Next slide. The programming is the other side. We spend a lot of time on the facilities and infrastructures and recreation amenities. The programming is also important that we get it right there. So formalizing our programming philosophy, understanding better the types of programs we should be offering, prioritizing program focus for Asheville Parks and Rec. There are a lot of services that are offered here, both nonprofit and private recreation and scope in Asheville. So understanding better what's our lane will be identified as we walk through the plan. Tracking updated programs for consistency and using matrices to kind of understand the value of the programs that we're currently offering, and then evaluation and identifying partners where we can partner with to make the programming experience a little bit better for our citizens. Below are just some of the areas programming-wise that's been identified within the plan that helps guide the direction program-wise that we should be going within our system. Next slide. I'm sorry, Chair Ullman.
Just because you welcome kind of questions throughout.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it a safe assumption that the programming priority to expand adult and active adult programs is partially because we do a pretty good job with youth programming, and that we have a lot and a big depth in our youth programming, and so folks value it and want to see us expand to other age brackets? That's my outside perspective. I just wanted to see if there was any other context on our youth programming of why it wouldn't be a priority.
Yeah, I can add to that. So yeah, these are more areas that talk about the need for expansion. So when we look at evaluating programming, similar to projects, it gets filtered through several different lenses. So one is what we've heard from the community in terms of, we asked them both what was most important to them, but also what they would like to see more of. And so that combination gives us some focus. But then we also take a look at age segmentation analysis. So one goal, it's not necessarily a perfect target, but one way to evaluate is to take a look at, the percentage of your population in each of these kind of age segments. And then what is the percent program offerings that you have in each of those age segments? So that's another factor. So when it comes to adult programming, even though there are a lot of hours dedicated and offered to adult programming, you also have a higher percentage of population in that category. And so there is a bit of a gap there, whereas we don't see as much of a gap on the youth programming between what's being offered and the percent of the population. Where we saw some additional need for expansion in particular among youth was through camps and outdoor environmental nature camps and programs. Those areas were identified. There's wait lists. So that's another factor that goes into taking a look at what programming adjustments to make. Wait lists are a really good way to kind of get a sense of where the demand is. And then there was a expressed to the community to expand cultural enrichment programs and special events, and through looking through other lenses, see that as an opportunity for more partnerships to expand that type of programming. So there's definitely more detail in the plan. These kind of bring some of the highlights to the forefront. And then we also make some recommendations for Asheville. This is going to be something that you'll continuously evaluate. So making some recommendations on how evaluating data and tracking information around programming can help in the long term to kind of continuously be able to evolve and adapt to changing community needs.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Brenna. Next slide. So again, we're in the final stages of it. Phase 3 is the plan development. We do have final drafts that was included in your package today. It's also been shared with the public, along with all supporting appendices to the actual document. So if people want to dive a little deeper into the data that was collected from the statistically valid survey, they have the opportunity to do that, as well as review the overall recommendations from the plan. Our goal is to give citizens another opportunity to take a look at this final draft. We'll take that feedback and include it in the final document. We're going to come back to you all next month in hopes of getting this plan a vote to move it to the council in August. And the ultimate plan is that council will adopt the plan so that we can get to work on these recommendations. Next slide. Again, the key takeaways, the plan is broken out into those 5 major focus areas. Those 5 focus areas are where we have our strategic action plan to guide decisions over the next 10 years. Investment zones have been identified based on equity, current conditions, the number of people it serves, and park experiences individuals have in those spaces. And then lastly, the plan identifies short, mid, and long-term goals to encompass various programs and projects over the next 10 years. Happy to answer any remaining questions that you may have.
Well, only thing I would like to say, thank you very much for this report. I've always said that the Parks and Rec, to me, that was one of my top priorities, because living in Florida for 25 years, where we had abundance, and coming home and not being able to have those facilities, or very difficult to find the facilities that I was used to or needed. And not only that, just for the community itself. And I am so happy to see where we are and what we've been able to accomplish in such I would say, a short period of time. And the programming, and basically, I will say, looking at your plan, there are a lot of questions I had and a lot of thoughts I've had. It's like you covered so many things that actually that I was concerned, and you sort of had it in did it in such a way and laid it out where it's very comprehensive, it's understandable, and it makes sense. And I would just like to say I'm sort of blown away, and I'm very excited, and hopefully we will be able to move this forward for the community, because I feel that it's something that we've not had, but we've not had in the past. But I will say with the 2016 bond rec, it sort of gave us a jump start to start, implementing all these programs. And now, fast forward to where we are, and basically talking about bond money. And can you imagine with the bond money coming up, and you've got a program to sort of give people an idea of what to expect with their bond money. So I'm grateful that you've actually brought this to us, and hopefully, we can get this implemented. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Mayor Kilgore.
I have a question, but before I land my question, I'd like to also say congratulations. This was a lot of great work. I like your approach. I like how you culled down community information and came up with your things and your action plan. But most of all, I really like the equity investment zone. I think that's very important to use across all of our departments and across all of our work. I just have one question for you. In your mapping, I saw that you identified a regional park in your phase 1 and phase 2. And I was wondering if naming it a regional park just kind of covers the regional users, or if you all can solicit some funding partners, regional partners.
Thank you.
Dee, would you like me to take that one?
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, it's a combination. So part of the process, we've made some recommendations for classifying your parks. It just gives some kind of benchmarks for what might be offered, the typical size of a park, amenities, and the service area that they reach. So a regional park is typically looking at a larger size park that has, a more variety of experiences for multiple users, and something that both serves people locally and at a community and neighborhood scale, but also something that people are more likely to drive to from a larger distance that really serves a larger portion of the community. And simultaneously, typically regional parks do, because of that, offer some opportunities for other sources of funding, economic development, certainly.
And in phase 1, I saw we had the recreation center. Is that Rec Park?
No, so Rec Park is identified as that regional, larger park for additional investments.
Okay.
Recreation centers that are identified in phase 1 are Shallow, Linwood Krupp Shallow Center, as well as Tempe AV Montfort centers.
But there was one in red, which identified it was a regional park. Is that Rec Park?
That's
Okay.
correct.
I thought that was okay.
I just want to add to what Brenna said. What we heard in the surveys is people like those large community parks where they can go to that have a number of different park experiences. So we have that in Carrier Park. Carrier Park is also in the plan to get some upgrades and make some improvements too. But the one that has risen to the top is Recreation Park. We identified that park as another space where we can have another larger community and regional impact.
I think one thing I continuously hear about Rec Park, the origin of Rec Park was more of an amusement park as well. And people are missing that family recreation element to our park experience or within our recreation system. I was just wondering if you got any feedback on any type of family fun.
Brittany, anything rise to the top that stood out to you when looking at that data?
I don't, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure that we got that kind of specific feedback related to Recreation Park, but there were certainly, comments around hoping to see improvements. I think a lot of it had to do with just making sure that it was up to date, high quality, and connected. I think people across the system, but also with Recreation Park, more ways to be able to connect and make sure it's accessible. That was a huge component. And then as planners and designers, there's an incredible opportunity to connect to a larger campus there and really capitalize on all the experiences that are already existing adjacent to Recreation Park to make a larger destination.
Councilwoman Smith, just to add to that line of question around Recreation Park, we see there's a lot happening in that space. You got Rec Park, Azalea Park, JBL, the Dog Park, Thomas Wolf Cabin. It's a large space with a number of different experiences. So when we identify Rec Park, we're really just looking at that, all of those spaces in that area in terms of how do we connect them somehow to make them feel more cohesive. And what does investment collectively look like in that space? And yes, what grant opportunities may exist that we may benefit from moving forward?
And I know a lot of our, we have a lot of transportation plans around greenways, around connectedness. And I know that there are plenty of work that thought about our recreation facilities and access to them. And so, like, for example, I know that there's some transportation conversations in that corridor to get people in and out safely and multi-mode. So I'm excited, especially as Vice Mayor was referencing with this bond package, the preparation, Deborah, that you've been leading your staff through to get us having thoughtful plans in these key areas where the community keeps telling us they want to see investment will allow us to say, okay, well, if we're going to do a transportation bond and we're going to do a parks bond, let's look at the parks prioritization process. And is there a synergy where we're lining up resources across different things with this funding? So I find it very exciting and hopeful that the bonds, people will touch and see what their money went to in ways that are really meaningful. So I find that really exciting. And yeah, basically, City Manager Deborah.
Sure, thank you. And in fact, I believe part of your criteria for investments was to assess, are there other public investments in and around the area? So yes, Madam Chair, we are definitely looking at collaboration in a lot of different ways and from a lot of different lenses. But I wanted to just address, and I hope that Dee and maybe Brenna can address this kind of the elephant in the room, that we have had some unfortunate incidents in our parks related to public safety. Can you all talk a little bit about that? Because I want the community to know that you know, we are looking at this space also from a public safety lens going forward, particularly in terms of how we design them and just create a safe, if not the perception of safety, the reality that you can come to our parks and you will be safe. So if you don't mind addressing that issue, I appreciate it.
Thanks, Deborah. I'll take first stab. And Brenna, if anything rose to the top in data that you saw going through this, certainly speak up. I do want to emphasize that our spaces, both park spaces and community centers, are some of the safest spaces that you can attend, be at within the city. Yes, we've had these unfortunate incidents that have occurred here lately, but it isn't, when you look at the data historically, our spaces tend to be pretty safe. There are efforts that we've identified within our current operating budgets to make them even safer, ensuring that all of our centers have cameras, security systems, having conversations around what does camera systems look like in our park spaces, especially some of our more popular parks. Those are conversations that we are having to help ensure that extra layer of safety within the Asheville Parks and Rec system. Brenna, was there anything in the data that you saw as we went through this comp plan?
Yes, yeah. So one of the questions that we asked during the community engagement process was about the barriers that people are experiencing and whether that's perceived or actual. And so about 17% of respondents said that they don't feel safe in Asheville parks. And that was a little bit higher when we filtered out to look just at the Black population, was 22%. So that gives us some indication. That is a pretty significant number. And so it's important to address real and perceived safety. And so we've outlined some strategies actually within our access and connectivity theme that talks about some best practices around design and programming for park safety, and strategies around approaching that equitably. There are some great environmental design practices that help to improve perception of safety, but sometimes those have been used historically to impose undue burden or policing on communities experiencing poverty or communities of color. And so we've outlined some best practices and some compassionate approaches to move forward. It's certainly, I think, a collaborative approach. And I did want to mention that all of the action items, we've workshopped with staff to determine where those synergies are between other departments and partners, because these are challenges that are multifaceted. But we certainly have a couple of pages dedicated to that topic in the plan.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
That concludes our presentation for today. Again, thank you all for your support and help. You will see us again next month with just kind of an update and hopefully the recommendation to move forward to council.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Great work.
Thank you all.
Okay. We'll move on to our fifth and final agenda item, which is our closing round of public comment. Do we have anyone that's dialed in to share and comment?
Yes, we do, Madam Chair. Just one moment. Caller ending in 6029. Your line is now open. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. My name is Patrick Conan, and I'm a resident of East West Asheville. I wanted to make public comment primarily on ATD's report back on the solicitation ordinance. First, I wanted to thank this committee for what felt like a more compassionate tone in discussing the solicitation ordinance and looking at the data. I think there's greater understanding that most people are doing this out of desperation. And I understand we need to keep everyone safe, but criminalizing people's existence or actions they're taking out of desperation doesn't get us closer to that goal. It is good to see that calls for service are down significantly. I did want to note that while we have quite a bit of data on calls for service, there's not as specific data around pedestrian accidents, which I found a little confusing. Those are represented as percentages, but we don't see if those accidents have increased or decreased over time. I thought that would have been helpful. I wanted to speak on high traffic zones specifically. The basic difference, as I understand it, is that people can't speak in high traffic zones to solicit. And that's a bit weird of a line for our city to be pursuing. I understand that ATD is looking to use data on pedestrian crashes to justify these high traffic zones, because there's a greater legal bar to put those in place. However, if you look even at the data presented in these slides, the zone 2 specifically for Biltmore Village doesn't show any pedestrian collisions even in the district that's been defined. So even the high traffic zones we have defined don't seem to be supported by data. I'm someone that walks along Haywood Road very often, almost every day. And I agree that there's several areas that are unsafe for pedestrians on Haywood Road, but I don't agree that it's because of panhandling activity 25 or 500 feet away. So I do encourage the city to look at ways to make Haywood Road safer, but I don't think the solicitation ordinance is the way to get there. We really don't know if these things are correlated or if we're just looking at data on a map and they're happening in the same place. I would also ask whether ATD truly has the capacity and resources to go to up and down Haywood Road and make sure no one is speaking. That just seems like, I don't see officers walking up around Haywood Road at all now. And I'd rather see them doing community policing activities rather than enforcing the solicitation ordinance. In closing, I just think that we have more serious public safety challenges throughout the city. And I think this committee should prioritize our limited resources towards those larger challenges and leave the solicitation ordinance as is for now. I think it's doing what it needs to do. Thank you.
Thanks for your call. Katie, do we have anyone else?
Let me just reload and double check. One moment. No, Madam Chair, we do not. That was our last caller.
All right. That is our last agenda item today. Looking forward, in July, we'll be looking at our climate justice initiative, this parks plan again, kind of taking a look at our fiscal year for this committee and kind of maybe where we're going forward. I see in August, we'll be talking about stormwater and our quarterly updates. A question, Deborah, to you. We've had stormwater on the agenda kind of earlier, and it seems to be getting pushed back a little bit. Is there any context for why it keeps kind of jumping back in time?
I think it's just having staff available. This is the summer months, vacations, just scheduling our staff to be able to be at the meetings.
Okay, and I've been hearing whispers that we might be actually, we have hired a stormwater engineer. This makes me so happy. It's just so hard to do all the good work that we've been wanting to, that we've been planning to, if we don't have excellent staff in those positions. So congratulations on that. I know that's an extremely competitive job because the private sector pays very, very well for those type of functions. So let's throw them a welcome party. That's great news. And so maybe by August, we might be able to meet that new leader in our team.
We can definitely try to arrange that. And Greg Schuler just shared the news with us yesterday at the management team meeting. So we're very happy about that. I think, Ben, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, you covered it well, Deborah. Yes, our new stormwater division manager started Monday of this week, and I actually went down there today, and he is there and working, so that's great news. But to answer your question,
I didn't know he had been on board. I thought you just said he'd been hired.
Yeah, we've got a consultant that's helping with the stormwater work, and I've actually am expecting we've re-engaged that consultant, and in the city manager's office, we'll have an update from Public Works later this week. And I think we'll be in a position pretty quickly to give you a timeline about how we get that process moving forward again. So really expect some additional information from us in the coming weeks on that. And we're excited to get that moving again now that we've got some staffing in place.
That is really fantastic. I know I've been hearing and talking with folks in the community about really cool ideas that look like easy wins for our stormwater ordinance to improve it and update it based on our current climate data. And I just keep having to say, like, we don't have the gas in the engine to move forward. So I'm excited to start being in community with the folks who are thinking about this from outside of the city lens and having the resources internally to do it. So anyhow, I guess we'll talk a lot more about this come August. So with that, unless there's anything else to share from our staff or council team, we'll conclude our meeting and we'll see everybody at the work session later today. Bye, everyone.